You just have to do the damn thing. And I think a lot of people, they want to make it about, well, this ingredient in food and this thing and this thing and this thing. Because if I can make it sugar is toxic, or if I can make it the food companies put addictive substances in this food, it's taking away my own accountability.
You gave me a line one time that has stuck with me, and it sticks with me when it comes to marriage. It sticks with me when it comes to dealing with budgets here at Ramsey. It sticks with me all the time, and that is people are always stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. And when I look at the landscape right now, we're a couple days after an election, right? All of a sudden, the literature has been flooded. I say the literature, the popular media has been flooded with fluoride and red number 30, and the seed oil thing's been going on for years and years and years. And I don't know enough to speak intelligently. What I know is fine. It may all be poison and bad. And 40 to 50% of the country struggles with obesity. And was it 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10 people have one or fewer people that they can reach out to and say, I'm not okay. And so when I think of the caustic mechanistic issues going on, it feels like we are playing on the margins. It's yet another distraction. Am I crazy?
No, you're not crazy. I think you just have to do the damn thing. And I think a lot of people, they want to make it about, well, this ingredient in food and this thing and this thing and this thing. And what they're avoiding is the inherent responsibility, the self-responsibility. Because if I can make it sugar is toxic, or if I can make it the food companies put addictive substances in this food, or if I can make it the government made us, it's taking away my own accountability. I don't have to be accountable for it. And I think the problem is if you don't have any responsibility with it, then you don't have, you're actually not in control of being able to fix it. And
it goes back to just owning it.
Yeah. And so when I look at the mortality data, cardiovascular disease risk, cancer risk, there are a few major things that stand out. And you can almost explain the majority of the problems based on these things.
Yeah.
The first is, the most powerful one is smoking, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
Smoking is...
don't smoke.
It's just a very linear increase in risk. But side note, if you want to know how easy it is to manipulate people with scientific research, I was reading a meta-analysis of adenocarcinoma incidents with smoking, right? And when you're looking at a meta-analysis, usually they'll include a forest plot, which is going to show, right of the line is this,
so you can see the
left of the line is this. Yeah. And, so in this meta-analysis, right of the line is increased risk. Left of the line, decreased risk with smoking. There's 50 studies in this meta. 48 of them are very far to the right? And the overall effect was I want to say over a 400% risk increase, relative risk increase in the risk of adenocarcinoma.
So for people who don't do science, that's
4 times.
That's astounding.
When you hear things in the media this increased your risk of cancer 20%, they're referring to relative risk.
Right.
So let me just explain that real quick. So a relative risk, let's say your absolute risk of something occurring over a period of time is 5%. A relative risk increase of 20% doesn't mean it goes to 25%. It means it goes from 5 to 6%, because 20% of 5% is 1%, so you add it to 5%, you get 6%. Doesn't sound nearly as scary that way.
Right.
Which is
if I don't remember the number, if your mom has, or one of your parents has schizophrenia, you have 100% risk. Right. Okay, so it goes from 1% to 2%.
Right. Exactly.
And those numbers aren't real, but yes.
For sure.
People freak out, and then it's...
Yeah. So 400% is massive. It is massive.
Yes.
But 2 of those studies were to the left of the line. Now, I could pick out those 2 studies and be like, oh, look, smoking decreases risk. And then I could couple it with, and this is actually very consistent literature, smoking decreases the risk of Parkinson's. It's very consistent in literature. Right. Now, it's probably from the nicotine is my guess.
Correct.
But again, so I could start to construct this pseudo argument that smoking is actually not only not bad for you.
It's neuroprotective.
It's good for you.
Yeah.
So smoking is a big one. That's I don't want to say an easy one.
It is.
But it's
easy.
you cut that out, you're cutting down a huge risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer. People think about cancer, but smoking is one of if it might be the biggest cause of cardiovascular disease.
Right.
And people have asked, what about smoking weed versus smoking? It is the smoke itself.
Right.
So the data is really difficult to tease apart, but it really is the ingestion of the smoke, because cigar smokers who don't inhale, when they control for that, and they control for cigar smokers or pipe smokers who don't inhale, who have never smoked cigarettes, they don't really see increased risk of like lung cancer. So it really does
Lip
appear.
and mouth cancer? Tongue cancer?
That's a little bit more dicey.
Okay.
I haven't looked as extensively into that. Dipping is much more powerful on mouth cancer because you have so much time that's in contact, you know?
You and I are trying to walk through as quickly as we can. Don't ingest chemicals in smoke into your body.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like the fact that we have to do that tells me that we've lost it somewhere. Obesity is the same way. If you're 25, 50, 100% larger than, and your body has to carry and deal with that.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's I don't know how we've jumped the shark in it's not good, man. It's not good for you. And there's 1,000 reasons. It's not good. It's not good.
And this is with smoking, obesity, drug use, whatever. Again, we were talking about this, like people make decisions based on emotion, not based on data. Because there's no, like at this point, people know smoking is not good for you. Just like heroin's not good for you, right?
Just like obesity is not good for you. Just like
I don't want to say that, there's nobody like this, but I would venture to say that no like healthy, well-adjusted person just like, think I'll try some heroin,
right?
Or I think I'm going to have a cigarette. No, it's a coping mechanism, right?
Well, and that's the secret that you talk to people who are in recovery.
Yeah.
That nobody tells you. Heroin works.
Right.
Alcohol works.
Until it doesn't.
Until it kills you. That's right. That's right. It works. It does. It performs a role.
In the short term, yeah. And so when it comes to obesity, yes, like that's the next thing that I'm going to bring up. If you have excess body fat, and people want to make it about sugar's toxic or processed foods, whatever. If you look at the hazard ratios, the odd ratios, it's explained by obesity. It really is very powerful. When you,
I heard Tia talking the other day. Even he said I attribute most of the drop in testosterone.
Oh, for sure.
To weight gain.
Yeah,
it's plastics. It's this. It's dyes.
Microplastics. This and that.
No,
if you look at how much obesity drops testosterone, it's easily explained by that. Wow. The decline in testosterone over the years. I'm not saying none of these other things may make any difference whatsoever, but obesity is the major driver of it. And I tell people like, let's focus on the big rocks.
Let's pick up the dollars, and then we'll pick up pennies, right?
Right. Well, it's kind of like I say, if I want to pick up as much in rocks as I can, I'm gonna start with the boulders,
right? And
then if I can get some pebbles, great. But I'm not going to drop the boulders to pick up the pebbles.
Okay, what matters when we're talking about obesity? I know it's a sensitive topic. Does 5 pounds matter? Does 15 pounds matter? Does 50?
If you look at the mortality data, the mortality data actually says, and again, this is correlational, so we have to be careful with how we interpret it.
Right.
But the mortality data says you're actually better off being around like 18, 20% body fat as a male than you are being like super lean. Right.
There you go. That's right.
So it's not about
aesthetic,
being super lean or anything like that. It's about not getting, obese.
Okay.
And
which is defined clinically as
for clinically, I believe for males over 25% body fat and for females over 30%, I believe.
Okay.
And there's BMIs that you can use as well. It just depends on what measure you're using. And so your risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, mortality, they all go up. Without getting too into the weeds, there are people who are obese who are metabolically still healthy, meaning they don't have abnormal blood lipids.
Sure.
They don't have abnormal blood glucose. That tends to be more of a rarity, but it does happen. Usually these people actually have more fat cells, and I could go into the biochemistry as to why, but it won't help anybody.
Yeah, right.
But even when you standardize for that, people who are obese, even if they are healthy obesity, they still have increased risk of mortality, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Yeah. Because adipose tissue, excess adipose tissue, is a metabolic organ. And it secretes its own hormones. It secretes inflammatory markers. It has, when it gets large enough in mass, it starts to dysregulate signaling in other tissues, liver, muscle. And so one of the most powerful things you can do, and again, not saying you have to be a six-pack shredded. That's not it.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at even people who are obese, you get the majority of the health benefits in the first 5 to 10% of weight loss. In fact, they were doing a study at Illinois when I got there. Layman's Lab was doing a study that I wasn't involved in, but I just helped out because I was an idiot first-year grad student.
Right.
They were seeing resolution of obese women's blood markers within 4 weeks of just starting to get into calorie deficit. It's really impressive how quickly things will clean up when you start. The human body is very resilient.
So I don't think we spend enough time there. Because guys like me are always saying, it's hard, it's going to be a journey, it's going to be whatever. With the right trauma therapist with me, it was 5 or 6 gnarly sessions. Mm-hmm. Of the 6, 2 or 3 were bad. They were tough.
Yeah.
And then I saw a huge shift, right? Or when you and I, when you started helping me early on, if I can just make some changes for 60 days, everything begins to shift. And it feels like it's forever.
Yeah.
And it's
handled today.
The body's amazing.
Yeah. And so when it comes to obesity, what matters? People aren't going to like this, but it's how many calories you eat versus how many calories you expend. That's what makes the difference. And people want to argue it. And I'm like, hey, if you sit down and you tell me, we know you need to earn more money than you spend if you want to save money. Nobody's going to argue that, right?
Right.
And people, you could go, well, but I don't know, expenses fluctuate and you don't know exactly what. Okay, cool. But you have an idea, right? And you can do averages. Well, interest rates and you could get a different return based on, okay. But you kind of know.
But math.
Math. But it still boils down to math, right?
Yes.
And so, I actually just did a debunk of a video of a guy saying, calories in, calories out is too simplistic. If you think calories in, calories out is simple, you don't understand energy balance.
Right,
because calories out, people think about these as very static things. And the reality is each influences each other. So calories out isn't just what you burn in exercise. That's one component of it. But you have your basal metabolic rate, which is basically the cost of keeping the lights on, just the energy to run your body and systems. And that's about 60 to 70% of your daily energy expenditure, your calories out. Then you have the thermic effect of food, which is how much energy it takes to extract the energy out of food. And that can vary. Protein tends to have a higher TEF than carbohydrate or fat. But it overall is not a massive contributor to energy expenditure.
Sure.
Then you've got your exercise, which is intuitive. You exercise, you move, you burn calories.
And neat. Fidgeting.
Neat. Yes. So that's actually
fidgeting.
That's actually a big one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
what does it stand for?
Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So basically pacing, fidgeting, posture, so non-intentional movements.
It's overlooked by kids. They move so freaking much.
They do.
And always just, and that adds up over time.
Oh, it's actually one of the, so when we look at people who are what we call obese resistant phenotype, there's 2 major things that stand out. The first is they tend to self-regulate their appetite well. They tend to be very in tune with their satiety signals, and they don't have a massive reward from food. Right? That wiring hasn't been created.
I feel better. They don't have that.
And if they overeat, they tend to increase their activity without even realizing it. And so people who are obese prone, they tend to not compensate by increasing their activity spontaneously.
Gotcha.
And they also get a bigger reward for food.
So where does the cultural, is it purely aesthetic? Because what you're saying right now, what I'm saying right now, there are people listening to the show that trust me. And there are people listening to the show that trust you.
Don't know why you do that.
But there's people, this particular thing sets something off. There's so much shame.
There's a lot to unpack. I think people have a hard time with the calories in, calories out, because if for that to be true, even though, yes, ultra-processed foods make it more difficult to be in touch with your satiety signals. Yes, trauma impacts these things. Yes, you can become dependent on food to help you cope. All these things can be true. But the same is true of money as well.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And when you boil it down, there is an inherent self-responsibility to this equation. And people don't like that. And it's easier to pass it off, And I've been guilty of this, not with nutrition, but in other areas of my life, where I'm like, but I had this thing. And I mean, you even said it to me, like,
do the next right
you
thing.
just got to do the damn thing, man.
That's right.
You don't need more information. You got to do the damn thing.
Yeah, the other day you were like, hey, you got a book? I was like, you don't need another book, man.
You need to go do the damn thing.
That was a long silence, right? I mean, that's all of us. That's all of us.
And it is, because it's like, I'm thinking about, a couple hundred years ago, you knew people in your community, and that was it.
That's it.
You knew maybe 100 people.
There are 3 potential mates.
And your news cycle was what happened around the corner and what you read, what the major stuff you read about, right? Now every horrible thing that happened everywhere in the world, right? Like, human beings aren't, at least in my estimation, aren't equipped to be able to handle that. And now you're dumping on top of that, well, you need to watch out for this, and you got to control this, and you got to do this.
And they're coming for you. And
we got to have good relationships, and we got to have
it's so much.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? My buddy Carlos went and spent a couple weeks with an Amish family, and he talked about, I think it was the 1920s, the average meal was approximately 90 minutes, and the average meal in 2021 was 12.
Yeah.
And he ate his bacon and eggs, whatever, and he was kind of getting itchy at the table because the average meal with the Amish family was about 2 hours. And at one point he said, hey, I'm done eating. And he goes, and the guy said, you're done eating, but the meal's not over. Yeah. And at one point he said, this is our Facebook. This is it. Like, we're learning about the community, what's going on in your world. And it just went, right? That's how we're wired. And yet.
And there's a lot of stuff to deal with. And, so the next big thing for getting healthy is exercise. And I'm going to tie this back in, but exercise is one of the only things you can do that doesn't cause weight loss that will drastically lower your risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer. Like, so there was a study got published, 4 minutes of intense exercise in a day lowers the risk of cancer by 20%. 4 minutes. You've got 4 minutes. I don't care how busy you are, right? Now.
And I've heard the same as go for a walk. Walk has a reductive effect.
Yeah, walking, steps. If you look at a chart of mortality and number of steps per day, it's like a precipitous drop off from 2,000 steps a day, which is sedentary, to 8,000, and then it starts to kind of like level off after that, right? But the other thing that exercise does that people don't realize, and I actually think is the most powerful effect for obesity with exercise, it's not the amount of calories you burn from exercise. You really got to do like very intense exercise to burn a lot, right? And for a long time. But exercise sensitizes your brain to satiety signals. You actually become better at regulating your food intake when you exercise.
Can I tell you, I become a better husband. I become a better dad. And I don't know if it's just satiety, but it clarifies my mind.
Whoa, yeah. Like
the whole world slows down a little bit for me.
My friends who know me are like, man, if you didn't train a couple hours every day, you'd be intolerable.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, we're finding now cognitive benefits to exercise. Like, there was just a study looked at adolescents who exercise, better test scores. There was a study done in men with major depressive disorder and anxiety disorder, and they had them 2 times a week for 25 minutes resistance train, 50 minutes.
Lift weights, yeah.
For, I think it was 8 weeks. Okay. It wasn't a advanced routine. It was very basic, right? Just go in and lift weights for 25 minutes 2 times a week. They saw a reduction in symptoms of anxiety and depression. And so we use what's called an effect size you're familiar with in research to kind of show you, like, it's not so that they'll report significant effects, right? Significance is, you can have a significant effect that's small if you have enough data points, okay? But effect size tells you not significance, it tells you how powerful was it, how clinically relevant is it. For perspective, a small effect size is considered 0.2, medium is 0.5, and large is anything over 0.8. SSRIs are anywhere in literature, or they hover around like a 0.5. The effects of 8 weeks of 2 times a week of resistance training for 25 minutes was an effect size of 1.7 on reducing the symptoms of depression. That is a massive effect size. And now I'm not saying this is both and.
Right.
I am not saying exercise is a replacement for medications for people who need them, because some people may need a medication to get them out of bed just to get them to go exercise.
That's right.
Because again, information is not enough to change behavior. I have seen people who are depressed who literally could not get out of bed. Right.
That's right.
So,
but it matters. It matters.
So we know exercise improves cognition. It improves memory. It is neuroprotective. We are seeing so much data now to show that exercise is, it's so interesting. What happens in the body affects the mind, and what happens in the mind affects the body. And like, for example, as somebody who dealt with kind of chronic lower back pain, the biggest game changer for me with reducing my back pain was psychological stress management.
Stress reduction, yeah.
And this is very clear in the literature. Yeah. And when I started digging into it, also, autoimmune disorders, extremely high correlation with stress. IBS, very high correlation with psychiatric disorders. And so, again, this isn't my area, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but it seems like if you're spun up, if you're ruminating, it's not just here. It's here.
It comes everywhere, yeah.
But if you do stuff here, it also changes the wiring up here.
Well, and my first thought is, if I can get somebody who's struggling with depression to commit to something over 8 weeks and just show up, it's the tiny wins, right? It's the tiny wins, and then you add the physical movement and the accomplishment. And you and I talked this morning.
You keep your promises to yourself.
That's right. You tell yourself the truth, and you can't read a book on confidence. You have to go do things, and your body begins to walk on firmer ground. It's cumulative.
Yep.
And so I think what you're saying is important, and I've reached a point where I want to make sure, I say this gently, but also I've reached a point that I carry around a lot of guilt to oversimplify it. And I'm carrying too much burden here, I know that, but for 20 years of taking young people and their families in educational environments and essentially patting them on the head and saying, oh, you struggle with X. You're not ever going to be able to ... You go over here in the corner and let me fight this for you. I'll fight these professors. I'll take care of this because you have this thing. You struggle with this thing. This part's hard for you. You go over there because, and here's any number of my nerdy academic arguments that say that's all you're ever going to be. And it has been the last 5 or 6 or 7 years that I have felt this overwhelming sense of there are true deep, I spent my career with victims, people who have been kicked to the margins, who have been just, their lives are staggering how rough they've been. And I have not landed in one of those conversations, from telling somebody that their child is dead to talking to assault victims to whatever it is, that we have not landed everyone on the exact same question. What are you going to do next? And so it's sitting here and exhaling and saying, I have a top 10 podcast on relationships and my daughter won't talk to me. I got to go see a therapist, because that's probably me, right? It is you saying, I just freaking won the international championship again, which congratulations, brother. And hey, Delony, can you talk about something else? Like something else going on in your life, right? And yeah, I got you. It is somebody listening to this podcast who is, for however many years, has Googled, has gone down the rabbit holes of, well, it must be this, and it's this in the water, and it's this in the food dyes, and it's whatever, and I'm still 30 pounds overweight, and exhaling and going.
So you want to know a phrase that I think you're really going to like?
Yeah.
So do you know who Ethan Suplee is?
Oh, yeah.
So Ethan, Hollywood actor.
One of my favorite actors, yeah.
Lost over 300 pounds. And I was on his podcast. He said something very profound to me. He goes, we spend so much time trying to worry about who started the fire. And what we should be doing is just getting the hell out of the house.
Yeah.
If the house is on fire, just get out.
Get out of the house.
And then you can worry about who started it afterwards.
Right.
And what that is like, he did the same things. He's like, I went down all the rabbit holes. I just needed to start doing stuff. Messy action is way better than ruminating in action.
That's right.
And we talked about this, and I've been guilty of this, I just need to understand why more, or I need to explain why I did something more. Doesn't matter. It does matter. It does matter.
And when you're safe, you can have that conversation. You can figure it out.
Right.
You can talk to the building code people, and y'all can redo the codes. Get out of the house. I love that.
Yeah.
That's good.